While I'm down in the clinic, I thought I'd grab this bad boy and use it to help show you what I mean when I'm talking about the 8 pelvic movements and why, in my way of looking at the body, they are super important for back pain. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Marion. I'm a physio, psychedelic assisted therapist, fascial manipulator, postural neurologist, a few other things, of which Pilates teacher. Who cares? I want to teach you about your back, and I want you to expose you to the Building a Bulletproof Backs method, which is essentially all about holistic back pain rehab, of which movement is a big part. So this is such a visible tool, and when we're learning, for some people, visibility is everything. Some people learn by putting it into their body and feeling it, which I think is crucial. But to get to that step, sometimes we need to see it. Certainly I'm a visual learner, so if I can see it, it makes a lot of sense to me. So while I'm down, I thought I'd grab this beautiful model. This is our skull. It's meant to sit like this when there's a head on top. So if it flips, try to disregard that. This is our neck. This is our thoracic spine. And then this is our lumbar spine. You'll see that we have vertebrae all the way up, from our pelvis right up to the base of our skull. And essentially, these vertebrae are like segments or links in a chain. And for the spine to have the amazing movement that it can have, each segment ideally contributes to the overall range of motion. What I think sets up a spine for maximum range of motion is what this part of the system is doing. This is our pelvis. It's made up of 2 bones called the ilia with a sacrum which unites them. And you know, this is where we get our sacroiliac joints, which people may be familiar with. So you can see that the actual vertebrae, the spinal column, sits on this pelvis. And if we had to look at where it sits in our own bodies, you know, if you can feel your waist and kind of you press in, you feel the top of your ilia. You can kind of hook your fingers in, place your fingers down, and you will be on the 2 ilia. So as I hold this and do some movements, let's go through the 8 pelvic motions that I think, and I'm going to do the movements in 2 different ways so you can see the impact of when I move my pelvis. You can see that my spine doesn't really have to do much, which is why I think pelvic motions are so critical for back pain, particularly in the phase where you want the spine to be relatively still so that it can repair. So first movement, it's really obvious here. It's called a shift. It's where we simply shift our body weight to the right foot or left foot in a shift pattern. And you can see that as I do that, the movement is actually happening in the hip sockets. So I have my femurs, and you can see that as I move, one femur abducts, one femur adducts. So it's pretty much a hip movement. Not much happening spinally there at all. If I wanted to say reach for a cupboard, reach for something that's off to my right, and I didn't shift my pelvis to the right, then I would have to do that reach using a side bending action of my spine. And I can tell you right now that feels very uncomfortable in my lower back. If what I do instead, when I want to reach to the right, I shift to my capacity in my pelvis and then I reach, I've got minimal spinal stress. I've got a lot of action in the hips, but my spine is semi-protected, or I would say protected, really protected. So just being able to access shift evenly from the right to the left is a really important baseline movement for protecting your spine. And you may think, oh, well, everyone does that. what's so hard about that? Nothing. There's nothing hard about it. But if you actually assess it in your own body, if you close your eyes and you go, this is my right shift, this is my left shift, most of you will feel a distinct difference in the quality and the overall amplitude of the movement available to you. Some people only have this much shift because they never do it. And all the tissues on the lateral hip are very tight and very restricted. Some people have huge amount of shift because their connective tissues are elastic and because it's a movement, for whatever reason, they probably do a lot during the day. So just assess your shift and think, is it equal, left and right? It's a really useful one to have. So that's 2 movements of our 8. Let's talk next about pelvic rotation. If I turn my body to the right, or I turn my belly button to the right, then I have rotated my pelvis into right rotation. If I go left, it's left rotation. So if we think about headlights on a car, here we're going right, here we're going left. And again, you can see that if my rib cage moves with me, then again, it's a hip movement, no spinal movement involved. If, however, I don't move my pelvis and I try and twist my body to look to the right or turn to the left, then that has to happen in my vertebrae. I have to get this rotational movement in the vertebrae. Backs, when they're injured, may not like rotational movements or twists. It may actually really aggravate them. So if we can learn to twist from our feet and our hips, i.e. get the movement happening in our pelvis via the feet, via the hips, then my back does not have to do much at all and it can continue to repair. Now you might say, well, that's easy. Again, that's an easy movement. It is an easy movement if your feet and your hips are working. If you have a foot turned out, which can be a hip turned out, then the minute I turn out my foot, I'm going to limit rotation away from it. And the minute I turn in a foot, I'm kind of already skewed in one direction with my pelvis. So quite often I see people come in and their pelvis is not facing forward. It's got a little bias, either left or right, which is basically a full-time rotational kinking of the spine with every movement that they do, which can really predispose them to more issues. So learning to get your pelvis facing forward is a really good place to start. Once it's facing forward, then we want to make sure that you know how to do it from your feet and your hips rather than from your spine. That's our 4 movements. Next movement we're going to talk about, pelvic movement, is a hike and a drop. So when I bend my left knee, the left ilium drops, the right ilium you can see comes up. So in that movement, I am dropping on the left, hiking on the right. And if I reverse that, opposite. It's a frontal plane movement, meaning if you're looking at me from the front, you can see what happens. When I drop my left knee, you'll see if I keep this skull pointing forward, there's a side bend, a lateral flexion into the lumbar vertebrae. I'm opening up the facets on this side and I'm closing them on this side. Now we know facet joints in the back, if they're starting to wear out, usually they appreciate a bit of opening. They don't like compression. So learning to figure out what influence your hike and drop is having on your facets can be a very empowering thing to know about your body. Let's say for whatever reason you've had a total knee replacement on your left knee and it doesn't quite lock back fully, so it's a little bit bent, then you're going to be a little bit dropped on this side of your pelvis, which may be creating a lot of right-sided compressional pain or left-sided opening pain. Sometimes in the back we get pain from compression or from distraction. And ideally what we want to do is learn to level out our pelvis so that it's not dropped on one side or hiked on the other, that it's actually sitting in the frontal plane quite level. That's 6 movements. 6 movements. Now let's talk about 7 and 8, which we're going to talk about as the tilts. We're going to turn side on. This is a sagittal plane movement. We're going to bring this person so that they have their eyes on the horizon. And then essentially you'll see if I stick my bottom out and I keep my head in place, I'm inducing lumbar extension. If I tuck my bottom under, I'm inducing lumbar flexion. Now, we know again with backs that particularly discs tend to enjoy a bit of extension, which we would call a forward tilt. Discs tend to not enjoy a backward tilt because if you can see, when I tilt my pelvis back under, keeping my head on the horizon, I'm inducing this kind of flexion into my lower vertebrae. If I'm walking around all day with my pelvis tucked under, then I'm essentially walking around in a bit of a stoop. When I drop my thoracic, then my head tends to go into a forward poke chin position and I can get a lot of neck tension in the higher vertebrae. Likewise, if I stick my butt out and I walk around in a full extension mechanism all day, I'm going to get compression, a lot of opening through the front. I'm going to get probably more compression in my upper back. Ideally, we want to be moving in and out of our pelvic positions throughout the day, and we want that movement to be synergistic between the skull, the rib cage, and the pelvis. When one moves, the other moves, the other moves. If I try and fixate one part and only have other parts moving, it's an unnatural motion which tends to create excessive motion at the hinge points between the curves. So, 8 pelvic motions. Got to work on my numbers, don't I? 8 pelvic motions which affect spinal mobility. The pelvis is the foundation for the spine. It's like your footings, you know. And given that your head is usually, eyes are on the horizon, the head is normally still, whatever's going on in this part is drastically affecting what the spine is feeling. So one of my key points is, let's not just focus on these vertebrae. Let's understand why they're experiencing the stresses they are by looking at the foundation on which they sit. And you can see that if I have a rotated pelvis and I'm walking around with this kink in my spine, it does not matter how strong I get my abdominals, I'm just locking that in. That's what I refer to as trying to strengthen your way out of poor alignment. I would rather find this alignment of the pelvis, the skull, and the rib cage in space from a frontal, from a sagittal, and from looking above, if we're looking down the body, from a rotational element, so that we don't need so much strength to help us move efficiently. We don't need a lot of strength. We don't need a lot of mobility if the skeletal structure is aligned in the first place. And that starts with our feet, our eyes, our vestibular system, our jaw. There's a lot more things that go into the brain's understanding of why it forms these alignment patterns. Hope that helps. I hope that kind of visually brings to life some of the ideas about pelvic motions visually, so that you can help get them in your own body. Hope that is of use to you in your back pain journey. And if it is, drop a comment, let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have a particular problem you notice in your body with your pelvis, then let me know and we'll do a video on how to best correct that. Till we chat again, thanks for listening.